I call Derek Ball.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to rise on behalf of New Zealand First and my colleague Clayton Mitchell to speak on the Employment Standards Legislation Bill, the second reading. And although I haven't been involved personally with the Select Committee or with all the other stages of this bill, I'd like to take this opportunity to ensure that this House understands and National Government understands our position on this bill, and why, although we do support separate parts of this bill, we will be still opposing it overall. Although the Minister has mentioned that during conversations with the Labour Party, they have come to some sort of agreement about discussions and changes, future changes. But obviously we haven't seen that, and as the bill stands as itself, we will still be opposing that. The aim of the bill, sir, as Andrew Bailey actually mentioned as well, is to make a number of improvements to the employment relations and employment standards legislation for the benefit of all Kiwi workers. But that, sir, is actually a little bit, or not just a little bit, quite greatly juxtaposed to the actual reality for New Zealand workers who are exposed to the zero-hour working contracts. And one of the issues that I've picked up, and like I said, sir, I haven't been involved with the process thus far, but that this is an omnibus bill, and there are parts through here that the entire opposition actually agree with, but the sticking point seems to be the 0 hours contract part. So I don't know if it was mentioned or discussed previously in the first reading or through the committee stage about whether it will be a logical step to actually discuss this bill in separate parts. But unfortunately, as it is, although, like I said, there are parts that we do strongly support, we cannot support this bill overall because of the 0 hours contracts. A couple of the parts that New Zealand First does support, sir, include the extension of paid parental leave from 16 to 18 weeks. It allows mothers with prem babies 40 hours of keeping in touch hours with their jobs, which is obviously quite important. And it allows primary caregivers to be someone other than the birth mother, and that can be determined by the parents. And it also introduces a premature baby allowance. So that's one of the vitally important periods of a baby's life, but also the parent's life as well. And New Zealand First supports any improvement to that, sir. We also support the stronger and more effective enforcement of the employment standards. It's quite a separate issue to obviously the paid parental leave part, but we do support and understand that that is an essential part of any employment contract. But then we get to the 0 hour contracts, sir, and I know that it's not labelled as 0 hour contracts within the legislation, but that's what it is in its essence. Although I do acknowledge that the Minister has said that there will be changes to the legislation moving forward, in the current form of the bill, that's exactly what this legislation actually entrenches into legislation. What it's got there, sir, is that it is actually included in employment agreements that do not provide any guaranteed hours of work, and that is a 0 hour contract. In fact, it actually provides or creates the availability of provisions that means staff can be required to be available for work at times without any guarantee of minimum hours or even minimum income. And effectively, that is allowing 0 hour contracts. So when that transfers and translates into the reality for Kiwi workers that are actually on 0 hour contracts, that means that they have got no ability to budget day to day, week to week, or even year to year. And that includes organising their lives and their children's lives in regards to daycare and in regards to school. And New Zealand First totally opposes 0 hour contracts, sir. And I actually note that during the committee or select committee, employers submitted to the committee, some employers are saying that they do not actually need the 0 hour contracts, and that there were actually over 12,000 submissions. There were all over 12,000 submissions, and all bar one did not support the zero-hour contracts. It is important to note, sir, that New Zealand First understands that casual contracts are an important part of the labour market, and that's why my colleague Clayton Mitchell actually has submitted an SOP, and that SOP is intended to create a loading on any casual employee, giving benefit to the worker and an incentive to the employer to move the employee on to part-time or full-time contract. And it works both ways for both the employer and for the employee. Casual loadings are not a new concept, but return to the situation that applied for nearly 100 years before the Employment Contracts Act 1991, when protections were given to our casual workers. Many of these protections have actually been maintained in Australia. The current situation where employers are only liable to pay for annual leave means that there is a systemic bias towards the employment of casual workers as it is, sir. The SOP proposals are intended to create a loading on any casual employee, giving benefit to the worker and an incentive to the employer to move the employee on to a part-time or full-time contract. The current situation where employers are only liable to pay for annual leave means that there is a systemic bias towards the employment of casual workers. There is no requirement to load for public holidays, for sick leave, for bereavement leave, health and safety, representative training leave, employment relations leave, jury duty, notice periods or payment in lieu of notice. Casual workers also have no access to personal grievance protections for unfair dismissal, and effectively these are cost transfers from the employer to the worker. The purpose of the supplementary order paper that Clayton Mitchell has submitted, sir, is to pay all casual employees a loading of 19% on the average hourly rate of a full-time employee doing the same or similar job as the casual worker. The 19% is broken down as follows: 1.6% loading for sick and bereavement leave, 4.4% loading for statutory holidays, 8% loading for standard holiday pay, and 5% casual loading. The employer will have the ability to move workers off a casual employment agreement and onto a part-time or full-time contract without paying any of the loading. There will be no penalty payments for employers who make part-time or full-time work available for casual employees. So, sir, there are, and I know that my colleague Clayton Mitchell will go in depth with the SOP on his return. But what I'd like to say, sir, is that although, like I have stated, New Zealand First does support parts of this bill, we do not support the bill overall, specifically because of the issues with the zero-hour contracts.